Aruna stood in front of the grand glass building of Veritas Corporation, her heart pounding harder with each step. She had believed every word Rafa told her. He said he had quit his job to chase new opportunities, to build a better life for both of them. But that morning, the truth hit her like a cold slap. A quiet call from an old friend at the company revealed everything. Rafa had been fired for corruption. Inside the building, whispers followed Aruna as she asked questions she never thought she would need to ask. Mr. Everett, the company's stern but fair manager, confirmed it without hesitation. Rafa had been caught moving company funds into hidden accounts. Not just once but for months. Betrayal seeped into every corner of Aruna's mind. The man she trusted had lied to her, and worse, had dragged her into a world she did not understand. Driving home, Aruna gripped the steering wheel tightly. Tears blurred her vision, but anger kept her going. She needed to leave. She needed to get away before Rafa pulled her deeper into his darkness. At home, the sound of running water told her Rafa was in the shower. Without wasting time, she pulled a suitcase from under the bed, shoving in clothes, essentials, and her most important documents. The fear inside her grew with every second. She knew Rafa well enough to understand that if he caught her leaving, he would not let her go easily. Her fingers trembled as she zipped the bag. She placed her phone silently into her pocket, switched off the location settings, and tiptoed towards the door. Her heart raced like a drumbeat in her ears. As she grabbed her car keys, a creak behind her froze her blood. She turned slowly. Rafa stood there, dripping water onto the floor, a towel wrapped around his waist. His face was a mixture of confusion and cold anger. "Where are you going, Aruna?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. She swallowed hard, tightening her grip on the suitcase handle. "I need to go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a second, time stood still. Then Rafa stepped closer, and Aruna realized, perhaps for the first time, just how much danger she was in. Rafa took another step forward. Water dripped from his hair, leaving small puddles on the cold floor. His eyes locked onto Aruna's suitcase, then flicked back to her face. For a moment, there was silence, heavy and suffocating. Then his lips twisted into a bitter smile. "You were going to leave without saying a word?" he said, voice thick with disbelief. Aruna said nothing. She knew that anything she said could trigger him. Rafa reached out, grabbing her wrist tightly. Pain shot up her arm. She struggled, but his grip only tightened. "You are not leaving," he hissed. "You promised to stay with me. No matter what." The man standing before her was not the man she married. Panic surged through Aruna's veins. Summoning all her strength, she yanked her arm free, stumbling backwards. Rafa lunged, but she ducked out of his reach, bolting for the door. She slammed it behind her and sprinted to the car. The engine roared to life. She reversed out of the driveway, heart hammering so loud she could barely hear anything else. In the rearview mirror, she saw Rafa standing at the door, fists clenched, his towel forgotten on the ground. Fear chased her as she drove through the winding streets of Windale. She headed straight to Salma's house, a cozy two-story home on the outskirts of the city. Salma opened the door even before Aruna could knock. One look at Aruna's pale face and trembling body, and Salma knew something was terribly wrong. Inside, over cups of warm tea, Aruna told her everything. Every lie, every discovery. Salma listened without interrupting, her face growing darker with every word. When Aruna finished, her sister slammed her hand on the table. "You are staying here," Salma said firmly. "He is not coming near you again." Aruna nodded silently. She wished it were that simple. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Call after call from Rafa. Then came the texts. Apologies. Begging. Promises. Threats. Aruna turned the phone off, her hands shaking. Night fell over Windale. Streetlights flickered outside Salma's house. Inside, Aruna sat curled up on the sofa, her mind racing. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? How had she never seen this side of Rafa before? Salma brought her a blanket, sitting beside her in quiet support. As the clock ticked past midnight, Aruna stared into the darkness outside. She knew this was not over. Rafa would not give up easily. And somewhere deep inside, a darker fear grew. Rafa was not working alone. She could feel it. Something, or someone, even more dangerous, was waiting in the shadows. Morning arrived with gray clouds blanketing the sky above Windale. Aruna awoke with a dull ache behind her eyes, the weight of the previous day pressing down hard. She moved quietly, not wanting to disturb Salma, and sat by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Her phone, switched off overnight, lay heavy in her pocket. Reluctantly, she powered it back on. Immediately, the screen flooded with missed calls and new messages. She scrolled through them with a hollow feeling. Rafa's desperate words filled each one. Some begging. Some angry. Some chilling in their emptiness. As Aruna stared at the phone, a different message caught her attention. A number she did not recognize. The text was short, almost clinical. Meet me. You deserve the truth. No name. No details. Just a location pin dropped on the old part of Windale, near the abandoned railway diner. Her stomach twisted with unease. Should she go? Salma would tell her it was dangerous. Yet something deep inside her urged her forward. Perhaps it was foolishness. Or perhaps it was the need to stop living in fear. She scribbled a quick note for Salma and slipped out into the drizzling morning. The streets were almost empty. A thick mist curled around the edges of the pavement, swallowing sounds and shapes alike. The further she drove, the more the modern city faded into crumbling ruins. The diner was a relic from another time. Faded red paint peeled from the walls. Windows boarded up. Aruna parked across the street, keeping the engine running. For a long moment, she stayed in the car, scanning the shadows. Then she saw him. A man in a leather jacket stood under the cracked neon sign, cigarette smoke curling around him like a second skin. He raised a hand casually, signaling her to come over. Against her better judgment, Aruna stepped out of the car. Each step felt heavier than the last as she crossed the road. When she was close enough to see his face clearly, something in her gut twisted harder. The man looked like Rafa, yet sharper, harder, dangerous. You must be Aruna, he said, his voice low and rough. Name's Davin. Rafa's half-brother. Aruna's heart dropped into her stomach. This was the presence she had felt lurking behind Rafa's actions. The darkness pulling the strings. Davin smiled without warmth. I suppose you think you know everything now, he said. But trust me. Rafa barely scratched the surface. His words dripped with menace. Aruna opened her mouth to speak, but Davin raised a finger to his lips. Not here. Too many ears. He tossed her a small envelope. Aruna caught it instinctively. Inside, she could feel the thickness of paper. Documents? Evidence? She had no idea. Read that, Davin said. Then you'll understand why walking away isn't an option. With a final smirk, he turned and disappeared into the mist, leaving Aruna clutching the envelope in shaking hands. Aruna sat in the car, the envelope gripped tightly in her hands. Her breath came fast and shallow. She tore it open, scattering the contents across the passenger seat. Sheets of paper, photographs, and a single USB drive slid out. The papers revealed a horrifying story. Rafa had been caught stealing, yes, but not for personal greed. Davin had forced him into it. Blackmail. Threats. Promises of protection for debts Rafa had foolishly racked up years ago, long before he ever met Aruna. The photographs were worse. Images of Rafa, beaten and bloodied, some recent, some clearly old. And among the faces lurking in the background of those photos was Davin. Always watching. Always waiting. Aruna's hands shook. Her stomach twisted with a sickening mixture of fear and fury. She realized then that Rafa was not simply weak. He was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. Suddenly, a knock rattled her window. She jumped, heart hammering in her chest. A man in a dark hoodie stood outside, peering in with a menacing smile. Behind him, two more figures emerged from the mist. Without thinking, Aruna jammed the car into gear and sped away, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. In the rearview mirror, she saw them giving chase, piling into a black van. Her mind raced. She couldn't go back to Salma's. She couldn't lead them there. Instead, she wove through the narrow backstreets of Windale, the city's crumbling heart becoming a labyrinth of danger. The van stayed close, too close. Every time she thought she had lost them, it reappeared, headlights flashing like angry eyes. Aruna swerved down an alley barely wide enough for her car, praying the walls wouldn't scrape the sides. She burst out onto a larger street, barely avoiding a collision with a delivery truck. The van skidded behind her, tires screeching. Desperation clawed at her. She needed to hide. To vanish. Spotting a run-down car park, she yanked the wheel sharply, ducking into the shadows. She killed the engine and ducked low in her seat, heart pounding. The van roared past a few seconds later, missing her hiding spot by inches. Aruna stayed frozen, barely daring to breathe. When the van didn't return, she finally sat up, wiping sweat from her forehead. She glanced at the scattered documents once more. A new determination sparked inside her. She could not run forever. She needed help. Someone powerful enough to stand against Davin. And she knew exactly where to start. Richard Moore. Rafa's former boss. The man who had first uncovered the theft. The man who might just know more than he had let on. With a shaky breath, Aruna restarted the engine and pulled back into the street. This time, she wasn't running. She was going to fight. The Moore Industries building loomed ahead, cold and impersonal against the overcast sky. Aruna tightened her grip on the steering wheel, steeling herself. The last time she had seen Richard Moore had been from a distance, a stern figure delivering a public statement about Rafa's dismissal. Now, she was walking straight into his world. She parked discreetly on a side street and entered the lobby through a secondary door, hoping to avoid attention. The inside of the building was all glass and steel, every surface polished to a merciless shine. The receptionist barely glanced up as Aruna approached. "I need to speak with Mr. Moore," Aruna said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Aruna admitted. "But tell him it's about Rafa Ortega." The woman hesitated, something shifting in her expression. Without a word, she picked up the phone and spoke quietly into the receiver. A tense minute passed before she hung up. "Take the lift to the 17th floor. He'll see you." The lift ride was suffocating. Aruna watched the numbers crawl upwards, her reflection fractured in the mirror walls. When the doors opened, a silent corridor stretched before her, carpet muffling her steps. Richard Moore's office was at the very end. The man himself stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned slowly as she entered, his sharp eyes scanning her in an instant. "Aruna," he said, voice low but firm. "I wondered how long it would take you." "You knew this would happen," she accused, barely managing to keep her tone civil. "You knew about Davin." Richard's lips twitched in something that could almost be called a smile, though it held no warmth. "I knew enough," he said. "Enough to understand that Rafa's troubles were just the surface. But corporate hands are tied when criminal roots run deep." Aruna pulled the envelope from her coat and laid it on his desk. "This isn't just corporate theft. It's blackmail. Abuse. You can't pretend it's not your problem." Richard's gaze flicked to the papers, but he didn't touch them. Instead, he leaned forward, folding his hands neatly. "Miss Aruna," he said slowly, "you need to understand something. Davin is not an amateur. He operates in places you and I cannot touch without consequences." Aruna met his eyes, refusing to flinch. "Then teach me how to touch him," she said. "Or stay out of my way." A long, tense silence filled the room. Finally, Richard sighed. "There is a way," he said. "A meeting. Tonight. Not official. Not clean. But it might give you leverage." He scribbled an address on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. "Go there," he said. "Ask for a man named Edward Pike. But be careful. If you show fear, they'll smell it." Aruna picked up the paper, committing the details to memory. As she turned to leave, Richard spoke again, his voice softer. "One more thing, Aruna. If you go through with this, you won't be able to go back to the life you knew." She paused, hand on the door. "I lost that life the moment Rafa lied to me," she said. Without another word, she stepped out into the cold hallway, the future uncertain but her resolve burning brighter than ever. The meeting place was a decrepit pub on the edge of Windale, where the streetlights flickered and the air smelled of damp and old smoke. Aruna hesitated outside, heart pounding, before pushing the door open. Inside, the world was dim and smoky. Rough-looking men hunched over drinks. A jukebox in the corner played a sad, forgotten tune. Conversation stopped as she entered, dozens of wary eyes tracking her every move. Aruna scanned the room until she spotted him. Edward Pike. He sat in a booth at the far end, one arm slung lazily over the back of the seat, a cigarette burning between his fingers. His face was lean, his eyes sharp with a predator's intelligence. Aruna walked towards him, trying to steady her steps. "You must be Pike," she said, voice low. He smiled, a slow, unsettling thing. "And you must be the girl poking the hornet's nest." She sat down, careful to keep her back to the wall. "I need information," she said simply. Pike took a drag from his cigarette, exhaling smoke between his teeth. "Information costs," he said. "And it's not just money, love. In this world, you pay in favors." Aruna kept her gaze steady. "What kind of favor?" He leaned closer, the smoke curling between them like a living thing. "You do something for me. Something inconvenient for a mutual enemy. In return, I'll tell you what you want to know about Davin. Maybe even give you something to bring him down." Aruna clenched her fists under the table. She had expected danger. She hadn't expected to be offered a devil's bargain. "What exactly do you want me to do?" she asked carefully. Pike's smile widened. "There's a shipment arriving tomorrow. Belongs to Davin. Nasty stuff. I need it to disappear. Quietly." Aruna hesitated. If she did this, she would be crossing a line. Committing a crime. But if she didn't, if she walked away, she would be no closer to saving Rafa or stopping Davin. She swallowed hard. "Where?" Pike slid a small crumpled map across the table. "Dock 17. Midnight." He stubbed out his cigarette and stood, towering over her. "Be careful, Aruna. Davin doesn't forgive. And he certainly doesn't forget." Without waiting for a reply, he walked away, melting into the smoky gloom. Aruna sat for a moment longer, staring at the map. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. There was no going back now. Midnight. Dock 17. It was her move. The night was colder than she expected, the wind biting as it rushed through the empty streets of Windale. Aruna checked her watch. It was almost midnight. Her breath fogged in the chilly air as she approached Dock 17. The map Pike had given her clenched tightly in her fist. The dock was silent, abandoned. Moonlight glinted off the rusted crates piled in disarray, and the faint scent of salt water mingled with the decay of unused steel. There was no sign of life, no trucks, no workers. But Aruna knew better than to let her guard down. Her footsteps were muffled by the thick fog that had rolled in from the sea. She scanned the surroundings, eyes darting between the shadows. The docks were deserted, but she could sense the danger lurking in the stillness. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. A sharp sound echoed from the far side of the dock. Aruna tensed, her pulse quickening. She was not alone. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a predator's grace. It was Pike, his face unreadable under the brim of his cap. "You made it," he said, voice low, almost a whisper against the noise of the waves. "Let's keep it quiet. The less attention, the better." Aruna nodded, her heart pounding. "Where's the shipment?" Pike gestured to a set of containers in the distance. "There. But we're not alone. Davin's men are on their way." She felt a surge of panic. "How much time do we have?" Pike checked his watch. "Less than 15 minutes. We need to get this done before they arrive." They moved quickly, slipping between the towering containers. Aruna could feel the weight of the task pressing on her shoulders. Every step seemed louder in the thick fog, but they had no choice. Time was running out. As they reached the containers, Aruna noticed a truck parked in the shadows. The back was open, revealing stacks of crates sealed with red wax. The same crates she had seen in Pike's map. "This is it," Pike murmured. "Help me get it loaded." They started working quickly, moving the crates with precision. But every so often, Aruna would glance over her shoulder, her nerves on edge. Something felt wrong. Her instincts screamed that they weren't alone. Suddenly, a harsh shout cut through the night. "Freeze!" Aruna whipped around, her heart leaping into her throat. 3 men emerged from the shadows, guns raised. One of them was familiar. A thug she had seen with Davin before. His cold eyes locked onto her. "Drop it," he barked. This is our shipment. You're making a mistake. Pike's face twisted in frustration, but he didn't raise his hands. Get back, Davis, he warned, his voice calm but firm. You don't want to make this worse. But the thug, Davis, sneered. I'm not scared of you, Pike. He gestured to the other two men, and they moved in closer, their guns aimed at Aruna and Pike. The situation had escalated fast. The tension was thick, the air heavy with the sound of distant waves crashing against the dock. Aruna's mind raced. She couldn't let this end like this. Not when she was so close. Get back, she snapped, surprising even herself with the authority in her voice. She glanced at Pike, who was already moving, pulling out a small handgun from his jacket. It was enough to shift the balance, if only for a moment. Now, she shouted. Pike fired a warning shot into the air, and the thugs flinched, momentarily distracted. Aruna seized the opportunity, ducking low and sprinting for cover behind a nearby crate. She could hear the sound of gunfire and the shouts of the men, but she didn't stop. She had to move. The next few moments felt like a blur. Aruna ducked, dodged, and rolled, narrowly avoiding the bullets that zipped past her. Her breath was coming in sharp gasps, her heart racing as she looked for an opening. Pike was beside her now, a steady presence in the chaos. Get to the truck, he shouted. I'll cover you. Without a second thought, Aruna dashed for the truck, the sound of gunfire ringing in her ears. As she jumped into the back of the truck, she saw Pike's silhouette in the shadows, firing back at the thugs. But she couldn't wait. She slammed the truck door shut, locking herself in. The engine roared to life as she floored the pedal, sending the vehicle skidding out of the dock and into the night. Behind her, the sound of gunshots faded, but the weight of what had just happened pressed on her chest. She had done it. She had made it out alive. But what was waiting for her next? The questions lingered, unanswered. And just as she took a breath, the radio crackled to life. Aruna, came Pike's voice, distorted but clear. This isn't over. Davin knows what you've done. He'll be coming for you. She swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the road ahead. I'm ready. Aruna's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white as she sped down the empty highway. The headlights cut through the darkness like a blade, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every so often, her rearview mirror caught a flash of light. Headlights, too close for comfort. It was Davies. Davin's men were following her. Her heart raced as she pushed the truck faster, weaving between the lanes, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She couldn't afford to slow down. The only chance she had now was to get to the safe house, to Rafa, to safety. But the road ahead seemed endless, the night swallowing everything in its path. The truck's engine roared as she hit the accelerator, but she could still hear the sound of the pursuit growing louder. A sudden screech of tires behind her snapped her focus. She glanced into the rearview mirror again, seeing the dark silhouette of another vehicle closing in. They were getting closer. Without thinking, Aruna took a sharp turn off the main road, down a narrow dirt path leading into the woods. The truck bounced and jerked on the uneven ground, but Aruna kept her grip firm, navigating the treacherous road. The headlights of the pursuers followed, but it was clear they weren't as familiar with the terrain. The truck swerved, fishtailing slightly, but Aruna managed to regain control. She could hear the other vehicle struggling to catch up, the engine roaring, but it was too late. The truck hit a bump, launching it forward, and then, silence. Aruna slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt. She looked around, her pulse racing. The road had ended in a clearing. There was nowhere to go but back the way she came. But it wasn't just the road that had ended. There, in the clearing, stood two figures. Davies and another man. Aruna's heart sank. Thought you could get away. Davies sneered, stepping forward, his gun raised. Aruna's mind raced, calculating the odds. She couldn't outrun them now. She couldn't even outgun them. She was cornered. Her only option was to talk, to buy herself time. You know you're wasting your time, Aruna said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. Davin's already got what he wants. I'm just the messenger. Davies chuckled darkly. No, love. You're the one who's going to pay for what you did. He stepped closer, his gun aimed at her chest. You think Pike's going to save you? He's been playing both sides. You're just a pawn. Aruna's mind raced. Pike had warned her, but she hadn't believed him until now. She'd been so focused on Davin, on taking him down, that she hadn't seen the bigger picture. Pike had his own plans. "Last chance," Davies taunted. "Give up or you'll regret it." Aruna's hand instinctively reached for the handle of the truck door. She was running out of time. But just as Davies took another step closer, a loud engine revved in the distance. Davies froze, eyes flicking to the sound. And then, from the shadows, came a familiar figure. "Pike! Get away from her!" he shouted, gun drawn. The thugs turned in surprise, but it was too late. Pike opened fire, his bullets finding their mark in the two men. Davies collapsed to the ground, clutching his side, while the other thug staggered back, falling against the truck. Pike ran toward Aruna, grabbing her arm and pulling her from the truck. "We need to move," he said urgently. "It's not over. Davin knows we're here. We have to finish this." Aruna didn't hesitate. She followed him, running through the trees, the sound of the engine and gunfire still ringing in her ears. They had made it this far. But the final showdown was still ahead. Aruna and Pike ran through the thick forest, their breaths coming in short, rapid gasps. The night was oppressive, the trees looming like dark sentinels. Every step felt heavier, each crunch of leaves underfoot echoing in the silence around them. Aruna could feel the weight of the gun at her side, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped it tightly. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To the safe house," Pike replied, his voice firm, but there was an edge to it, a sense of urgency. "We can't stop here. Davin has men everywhere. We need to move fast." Aruna nodded, following him through the dense underbrush. The sounds of the forest were deafening, but they both knew that danger could be lurking just around the corner. Every shadow, every rustling of the leaves could be another threat. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the woods and into a small clearing. A dilapidated cabin sat there, half hidden by overgrown vines and trees. It looked like something out of a nightmare, but it was the only safe place they could go. Pike hurried inside, motioning for Aruna to follow. The inside was cold, and the smell of damp wood filled the air. It was sparsely furnished, with only the barest essentials. "Stay here," Pike said, his voice low. "I'll check the perimeter." Aruna watched as he disappeared out the back door, her eyes scanning the dark cabin. The silence was suffocating. She felt the weight of everything crashing down on her. How had everything gone so wrong? She hadn't realized she was trembling until she sat down on a rickety old chair, her hands gripping the edges for support. Her mind was racing. Pike had warned her about Davin, about the danger she was in, but now she was starting to wonder if she had made a mistake trusting him. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Davin, Pike, even herself. They were all playing their own games, and she was caught in the middle. The sound of a door creaking open jolted her from her thoughts. She stood up quickly, her heart pounding. Pike appeared in the doorway, his expression dark. "We're not safe here," he said, his voice tense. "They've found us. We need to move now." Before Aruna could respond, a loud crash came from the front of the cabin. Aruna's heart stopped. "Move!" Pike shouted, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her toward the back door. They ran again, their footsteps pounding the ground as they sprinted through the woods once more. But this time, they were not alone. In the distance, headlights pierced the darkness. Davin had found them. Aruna and Pike stopped dead in their tracks as the headlights of the approaching vehicle grew brighter. The faint sound of an engine grew louder, and with it, the gnawing feeling of inevitability. This was the end game. They couldn't outrun Davin now. Months passed, and the world around Aruna slowly began to heal. The man who had once controlled her life, her decisions, was gone. The people who had been tangled in his web of lies and manipulation were now free. Aruna had made her peace with the past. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that dark forest months ago. She had learned, grown stronger, and was ready for whatever came next. Pike, too, had changed. He had let go of the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. Together, they had made it through the storm. The fight was over. But their journey was just beginning. And in that moment, standing side by side, they both realized that they were finally free. Pike's grip on her arm tightened, his eyes scanning the dark forest. The light from the vehicle was blinding as it drew closer. Every muscle in Aruna's body screamed for her to run, but there was no more time. She had to face this. "They've got us surrounded," Pike muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "We'll never make it out of here." Aruna's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of everything on her shoulders, the lies, the betrayal, the risk she had taken to get this far. And now, standing at the edge of the abyss, she knew there was no going back. She looked at Pike, seeing the familiar unease in his eyes. She knew what he was thinking. He wasn't just concerned about surviving. He was thinking about getting her out of this. But at what cost? "I'm not running anymore," Aruna said firmly, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. "I'm not going to be a pawn anymore." Pike stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he nodded, his jaw tightening in resignation. The car's headlights broke through the trees, and with it, the figure of Davin. He stepped out of the vehicle, his face twisted in a smug smile. "So, you think you can outrun me, Aruna?" Davin called, his voice cold and mocking. "You've made your choices, and now you'll pay for them." Pike stepped forward, his hand on the gun at his side. "Not if we have anything to say about it," he growled. Davin raised an eyebrow, his smile widening. "Ah, Pike. The loyal dog. But you're too late." He nodded to the men behind him, who began to surround them. Aruna's mind raced. She knew she had only one chance left. She glanced at Pike, her eyes steely with resolve. "Stay close to me," she whispered. With a sudden, swift move, Aruna yanked the gun from her side and pointed it directly at Davin. His eyes widened in surprise, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The air was thick with tension. Davin's smile faltered. "You wouldn't dare," he said, his voice trembling slightly, though his facade remained strong. "I'll do whatever it takes," Aruna replied coldly, her voice steady, unwavering. "You're done, Davin." Before Davin could react, Aruna pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot shattered the stillness of the forest. Davin staggered back, a look of shock on his face as he collapsed to the ground. For a moment, there was only silence. Davin's men hesitated, their eyes flicking between each other and Aruna. Pike stood beside her, his gun still drawn, ready for anything. "Get back in the car," Pike said, his voice low and commanding. "We're leaving." The remaining thugs hesitated for a long moment before they finally backed away, retreating into the woods. They weren't prepared to fight, not without Davin leading them. Aruna stood there, her heart racing, still holding the gun tightly in her hand. She felt numb. The weight of what had just happened was beginning to settle in. Pike turned to her, his face grim. "We're not out of danger yet. But we have time to get out of here." Aruna nodded, her eyes never leaving the spot where Davin had fallen. "Let's go." Together they walked away from the clearing, into the dark forest, knowing that the battle was over. But the war for them was only just beginning.